welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today is the question answer video, and I must say I am thoroughly impressed with the questions that you guys submitted to me, and I'm eager to answer them. Honestly, to do justice to some of these questions, I would have to devote an entire video just to each one, but I'm going to do my best to answer succinctly and do the questions justice at the same time. So before I begin with the questions, I have a couple thank yous. I'd like to thank Alex Nieves, who gave me the inspiration to do the question answer video. He has a wonderful channel, and I highly recommend that you check him out. Another thank you to Elliot Brooks, who gave me a really sweet, wonderful shout out on Instagram, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm not on Instagram. I actually have never even tried to use Instagram before, so I didn't know what was going on. I suddenly saw an increase in subscribers, and so I had a little help from a viewer who let me know what was happening, and I'm just very grateful for that. It's just such a wonderful community to be part of. And yeah, so I got to see my first Instagram post as well. Maybe I'll venture onto Instagram someday. I just started to venture onto Twitter a little more. I feel like that guy in the airport or in the train station who is just standing there like, while everyone else is going wherever they're going at warp speed. That's how I feel when I'm on Twitter right now, but I'm kind of getting used to it. So we'll see how that goes. At any rate, let's get down to these questions. These are fantastic, and I need to be succinct, so here we go. So, question from Joanna, and oh, by the way, please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I'm doing my best here. I'm going to say Joanna, and the question is, what are some non-book related hobbies you enjoy? What are some things you like and dislike about modern fantasy? Books written in the last decade or so. How much time do you devote to reading fantasy each day? So the big non-book related hobby for me is definitely tennis. I'm out there on the courts usually at least 3 times a week. When I was a little younger, it was maybe even 5 days a week. But yeah, I love tennis, and it's my sort of meditation, if you will. It's a great stress reliever, and I just really love playing. It's a fantastic sport, and yeah, so that's my non-book related hobby. And as far as some things I like and dislike about modern fantasy, well, here's one thing I like. I love how diverse the genre has become in the last few decades, and particularly in the last decade. This can only strengthen the genre, in my opinion. And I am absolutely becoming a fan of more and more diverse authors, and I think that's just a wonderful thing. As far as what I dislike, I have to stretch a little bit for that. I would just say that maybe I feel that a lot of authors could pay more attention to their prose, and I would like to see, I guess I view writing as a craft, and it's something that you work at and you try to get better at. And there are certain things that make your story more effectively come across to a reader. And so that is part of the craft of writing, and that is something I think all of us who aspire to writing would definitely do well to make a study of. So yeah, maybe that's my answer. Let's move on. Here's Danny Madsen. I'd like to hear stories about you teaching. You can pick and choose from this as you see fit, but things like, what is their general feeling coming into your class, meaning the students? Do most of them have an interest in fantasy already beforehand? Because I teach a fantasy novels class. Which books are the most popular in your course? What are some memorable moments you've had in your class? What kind of feedback do you usually get after the course? What makes Dr. Chase awesome? That's a very sweet question. So yeah, I have a lot of teaching stories, and I have to say the best thing about teaching for me has always been my students. And I feel so humbled every time I go into a classroom, and I learn so much from my students, and I'm very grateful for that interaction in my life. I'll just tell a couple stories, I think, that really touched me. I once had a student who was really a very strong student all semester long, and she was in my Intro to Literature class, and she had been fairly quiet, but when she contributed, they were great insights. And at the end of the semester, after it was all over, she came to see me after the grades were in and everything, and just told me a story, something I had no idea was going on. But she said to me something like this. This was many years ago, but she said, you know, Professor Chase, I just want to tell you how much this class meant to me, because I've been struggling in my life right now. My boyfriend is dying of cancer, and this class has been really important to me to help me process what I'm going through right now. And so I just wanted to thank you. And I was just, my jaw was hanging open. It was a very, it was a powerful moment for me. And I really do believe that we tell stories because we need to, and because of the catharsis they give us. And I'm sure that you relate, if you, those of you who are on BookTube, you know, you get to the end of a great book, you turn that last page, and you read those last words, and you sit there just blown away. And I think that's something that we human beings really crave, and that's why we tell stories, that's why we have art, that's why we have music. These things help us process life and make sense of things. So that was a very powerful thing for me that I experienced with a student. And I've had a few other examples of that sort of thing, but in the interest of time, I think I'm going to move on to the next question. Darth Andy writes, can you give an overview of your experience with how the fantasy genre is generally perceived in academia? Has there been any recent progress in fantasy gaining more respect? I think my short answer to that is yes. I believe that academia has broadened and become more embracing of popular culture. There are even disciplines nowadays like cultural studies and things of that nature, and you will find even in English departments, mostly medievalists who are interested in fantasy. I'm sure there's been uncountable dissertations on Tolkien, but there's also been stuff on Harry Potter, and I'm sure that there are some great authors like Stephen Erickson comes to mind, who would be ripe for dissertation writing. You know, the Malazan Book of the Fallen would be a great series to write a dissertation on. And there are many others too, frankly. So yeah, my sense is that fantasy has become more seriously taken in the last few decades. That it's still viewed as a fringe thing, but largely speaking, I think there's more room for people who want to study fantasy. Next question is from A Fantasy Babble. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience living in Asia? What you learned and what you liked the most? Did you always want to be a college professor? What other paths did you seek, if any? What sort of life lessons can you share with us, some words of wisdom to us younger folks? That's wonderful. My experience, I lived in Nepal, in Kathmandu, for about a year, and I was teaching at Tribhuvan University in their English department. And that was a transformative experience for me in many ways. This was in the mid-90s, shortly after I had finished my master's degree, before I came back to do my PhD. I met so many just beautiful people over there, and I just fell in love with the culture and learned so much from those people. I would recommend to anyone who can do it to live abroad for a year, live in a country where you weren't born, and it will absolutely open your mind. And make an attempt to learn the language as well. It's just an experience that I can't even begin to describe how important it has been in my life. And so yeah, it was really just an amazing experience, what I learned over there and how it changed me, and I hope I contributed a little bit while I was there too. Did I always want to be a college professor? No, I actually was probably halfway through my PhD before I figured out, yeah, I want to teach. And I'm so glad that I did, because teaching has been a wonderful career for me. I really, like I said before, I enjoy interacting with my students and my colleagues. So I had thought of a few other things before. I always wanted to write as well, But I met with a writer when I was very young, and the writer said, hey, it's great you want to write, but you need a day job. So that's what I had to figure out, the day job. And so, yeah, I think I sort of just gradually fell into it. I didn't know what I was going to do when I was in college. I was a liberal arts major, which is what I guess you are when you don't know what you want to do. But I had a great time learning, nevertheless. So, yeah, words of wisdom. Follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell would have said. Follow your bliss. So yes, from Eric McLuhan. What do your colleagues think of your side hustle? That means the YouTube channel. Are the books you read / critique considered literature? And you probably mentioned this before, but what is your area of expertise? So I think I addressed part 2 of that, so I'm just going to go right to my colleagues, who are wonderful people. Actually, they've all been very supportive, and several of them have subscribed to the channel. And one person I work with even read the Broken Earth trilogy after I did the video on that, and she's going to read Joe Abercrombie next, I think. Right, Sharon? I think so. So yeah, they're wonderful people, and they've been very supportive. And the other part that I still need to talk about, my area of expertise, yes. I am a medievalist, and I especially focus on Old English, and I'm very interested in Old Norse, and I do Middle English as well. So that's my real focus, although I do also teach survey courses of literature and writing, so yeah, and fantasy novels, yeah. Okay, from Alex Nieves. If you were tasked with teaching a class about one book that you feel is the most impactful or important book to you, what would it be? That's a wonderful question, Alex. Thank you. It would be Beowulf for me. I love Beowulf. And I feel bad that a lot of people read Beowulf, or a translation of it, in high school, and probably end up hating it. Because I don't think that maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think probably it's better to read it when you're a little bit older than high school. But for me, Beowulf is just such a beautiful text. And of course, it's much better in Old English. There's nothing as rousing, get your blood stirring as some verses in Old English. What? Wegardena in dagum feud kyning afrimja frunan, huda athalingus ellen fremedon. So those are the opening lines of Beowulf. And yeah, I subscribe to Tolkien's view of Beowulf as being a lament for the past, essentially. And that the Christian poet is looking back on his pagan ancestors of yesteryear, and with a sense of admiration for their courage and their loyalty and their drive and their grit for surviving in a hostile world, but also a sense of the futility of their pursuit of their ideals, which involve fame and great deeds and all that sort of thing. So because everything is fleeting, everything gets lost. That's a big theme in Old English literature. So yeah, it would be Beowulf for me. And here's from Ridima. What's something you dislike about fantasy? And yeah, I did talk about that. Maybe I could talk a little bit more about the prose aspect of fantasy. To me, and I addressed this in my review of The Immortals of Meluha, which is a wonderful book, and there's so many things about that book that I love, and I'm going to continue with that trilogy. But one of the things I wanted to talk about when I was reviewing that book is fantasy prose as a device that an author uses to create a different world from ours. And this can involve a slightly archaic language, slightly elevated language perhaps. Shouldn't overdo it, obviously, or it becomes ridiculous. But I find that when fantasy is written with prose that is just too modern, it jars me out of the story. And so that's one of my things, I guess. That's maybe, I don't know, I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. If you think a more modern prose is more accessible and is the way to go, or if you prefer a little bit of archaic to make you feel like you're in a different world. So that's my thing, though. I definitely am on more of the side of the archaic stuff. Not too much. Ursula Le Guin, I mentioned in that video that I talked about, that review. Ursula Le Guin has a wonderful essay called From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, which addresses this very topic, fantasy prose. And she says it much better than I can. So I recommend you check it out. Okay, so here we have Knickknack's Corner. What is your favorite book of all time? Lord of the Rings. That probably will never change. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings was the book that baptized my imagination. And it is most certainly the most responsible for me being a lifetime lover of fantasy. That wasn't the first fantasy I read. I did read some Lloyd Alexander, The Chronicles of Prydain, before I did Tolkien, but it's the first one that just blew me away and left me with this sense of incredible beauty and sorrow. That's the catharsis I was talking about before. So yeah, Lord of the Rings for me. And there are some great ones that I've been reading recently that are also coming close there, but I don't know if anything will ever dislodge Lord of the Rings from the top for me. Let's see here. Andy Smith. What is the first thing you think of when I say most unique fantasy world component? That's got to be the toughest question I got here. I'm going to go with the giant, and I mean giant, turtle in the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. There's this giant turtle that has 4 elephants on it, and these 4 elephants hold up Discworld. So yeah, that's got to be the most bizarre, unique fantasy world component out there. That's what I'm going with anyway. Okay, so we have Zachariah Tal, maybe? I guess that's a Tal. Could be Thal. What are your thoughts on literary genres generally and fantasy's various subgenres? High, low, urban, grimdark. Is it mostly just about marketing, or do they have some distinct differences that can be pointed to? I'd like to know more about their development. I assume high fantasy comes more from Tolkien, while low fantasy comes more from Howard and other pulp stuff, for example. So yeah, I did not address that when I made my video on the origins and development of fantasy too much. I mentioned there's lots of different subgenres nowadays, but sometimes I think that these distinctions are helpful, and sometimes I think that they are almost meaningless, because a lot of books blur from one subgenre to another. And for that matter, even fantasy can blur into science fiction or horror, and so these boundaries are perhaps useful for marketing and for people who know that they like a certain type of fantasy, urban fantasy or epic fantasy or whatever. So to find books that you like, maybe there's some use there, I suppose. And some of the distinctions do matter, I guess. I don't think it's purely a marketing gimmick. And I do think that, for example, if you mentioned high fantasy and low fantasy. My understanding of high fantasy is more like Tolkien would be the classic example of that, and low fantasy is where a bit of magic invades here and there. It could be like magical realism, that kind of thing. And it can be even a more like urban fantasy type thing where you have a more modern setting. I could be wrong about that, but there are just so many subgenres, and I don't think it's terribly important to know exactly what they all mean. Yeah, I think they're somewhat helpful. So, not a great answer, but I'm going to move on. From the Library of Alexandria, which is your favorite Malazan book and Malazan character? Also, coolest place to which you have traveled, and did you take Latin? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm going to start with the easy ones first. Yes, I took Latin in high school, and it was a class that absolutely inspired me. That and history, which I believe, Alan, you also teach. So American history, I had a great teacher when I was a junior in high school, and also my Latin teacher. I loved learning Latin, and it was probably the first time I really felt opened up to languages and the wonder of languages. So I'm absolutely a big fan of Latin, and I think it should be taught more. But to go to the Malazan thing, that's tough. It's like you're asking me to pick my favorite child or something like that. So I really loved book 2 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Dead House Gates, with the chain of dogs, and that was probably the first moment when I realized, oh wow, this guy's something. This Steven Erikson guy, he can write. That was, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read Dead House Gates yet, but wow. I also loved Memories of Ice. That seems to be one of the more popular, that's book 3 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I guess I'm going to do a cop-out here and say book 10 is my favorite because it wraps it all up and brings everything to a wonderful cathartic close. So yeah, I'm going to go with book 10. Favorite character from Malazan Book of the Fallen? Tehol Bedict. Tehol Bedict, he is absolutely genius. And I also, a very close second, Quick Ben and Anomander Rake, and I probably should stop because I'll come up with a bunch more because Erikson writes fantastic characters. So yeah, that's my answer for that. Coolest place I've traveled to. I've been to a lot of, I love going to England. I love, I don't know, that's a tough one. That's a favorite child question again there. Alan, come on, how can you do that to me? Nepal, probably. I guess I lived there, and I traveled all over India too, and I loved it. So maybe I'll go with that. Okay, from The Serpent. All right, you mentioned to me that you've been writing your own fantasy novels, predominantly in the summers. Do you mind explaining what they're about, or some other aspect about them? Okay, so yeah, I've been working on, I'm a little shy to talk about it. I've been working on a fantasy trilogy for the last 16 years. And you'd have to think somebody would have to be epically stupid to keep working on something for that long. But I've actually enjoyed it. I love writing. It's I've learned so much in the process of writing. And I feel really good about these books now. I've been working on them and chiseling and working, and it's been just an incredible process. I feel like they're where I would like them to be, and I actually have an agent now, so who knows, something could happen. We might get a publisher, and I will certainly let you guys know if that happens. That would be an announcement that I feel would be appropriate for the channel. So yeah, and as far as what they're about, I'll just say that a lot of it stems from my having encountered various cultures and learned different languages. One of the cultures that it appears in my books comes from a more Old English kind of vibe, and then there's an Old Norse one, and there's a Celtic one. At one point in my life, I was pretty good at speaking Welsh, so I based one of these cultures on kind of a Celtic feel, and of course there's a South Asian based kind of culture. I do speak Nepali, so I was able to kind of base the language there off of that, the place names and the names and so forth. So yeah, I hope I have an interesting cultural mix in there with my world. It involves a religious war, I will say that much, and I would describe it as high fantasy with perhaps some shades of grimdark in there. So yeah, that's about it for now. I hope to have an opportunity to tell you guys more about it later. And so Chief Hand Grenade 11. How did you get into reading fantasy in particular? What are some of your favorite movies, TV shows, songs? Your channel's great. Oh, thank you. Keep doing what you do. Thank you so much. Yeah, I got into fantasy. I mentioned Lloyd Alexander was the first fantasy I read that I can remember. Tolkien, as I said, was the one who just opened the door to the whole world of fantasy for me. And I walked through and I haven't come back. The road goes ever on and on. So yeah, I think that, yeah, that's how I got into fantasy. And I love reading in general too. I do love learning, and so fantasy is my playground, but there are so many other great things to read as well. So yeah, and thank you so much. Oh, as far as movies, TV shows, I don't watch much TV. We don't have any cable connection or anything in our house. So I do like watching tennis. I do watch tennis I mostly watch highlights on YouTube. And songs, I love music. I absolutely love music, and there are so many different kinds of music that I enjoy. I love classical, I love folk music. I will listen to almost any type of music, whatever moves me. I'm not particular. So, yeah. Okay, from DA, have you thought about delving into epic sci-fi series such as Herbert's Dune or Asimov's Foundation series for your channel? What do you think about doing movie reviews on the film adaptations of fantasy books such as The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings? Do you ever read or listen to fan theories of series you enjoy, such as the many that are spawned from A Song of Ice and Fire? And who do you think is the most influential epic fantasy writer who's currently alive and active? Wow, okay, a bunch of good questions. I think I'm going to stick to fantasy for my channel. I am sorely tempted, though, to do a Dune review, seeing the excitement about Dune. And that is a book I have read and I love. I think it's a great book. I wanted the channel to be about fantasy, so I'll have to think about that. I don't feel as nearly well-read in science fiction or horror or any of the other related genres, so I don't know. I'll have to think about that. And let's see, movie reviews. I might do some Lord of the Rings. I do like those movies, so that's a good thought. That's a great suggestion. I get great suggestions from you guys. And I feel interesting. I've evolved a little bit in my thinking about fan fiction and that sort of thing. I'm actually okay with it. I kind of like Neil Gaiman's stance on fan fiction, which is like he's totally cool with it. So that's where I am on that right now. And as far as most influential fantasy writer who's currently alive and active, I think it could have been George R.R. Martin if he had just kept going with the books. But he didn't, and that's fine. That's the way he writes. In my opinion, he writes great books. I'm hoping there will be a 6th book at some point. We'll see. But because he's much more prolific, I would say Brandon Sanderson maybe is the most influential in the genre right now, who's alive and writing. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Sanderson because he just keeps putting out books, and that's a virtue too. So. Okay, let me see here. I've got Hans asking, if you could make your favorite authors write a book in a genre they have never written a book in before, which authors would you choose? Which new genre would you choose for them, and why? Oh, oh my goodness. I think I'm going to give an unusual answer to this. There is... a lot of crossover. A lot of the authors who do write fantasy do write in other genres. George Martin, I just mentioned, he's done some sci-fi. There just are, yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to see him write because it seems like he knows so much about the 14th and 15th centuries, the 100 Years' War and the War of the Roses. Maybe he could write a history book. I like history, so I bet you George Martin, with as much as he's got stuffed in his head, would write a hell of a very entertaining history book of the Middle Ages. So that could be fun. Okay, I'm gonna go with that for now. Mike Hughes asks, what is your favorite Wheel of Time novel? Oh, another favorite child question. Whew. I have a lot of nostalgia for The Eye of the World, the first book. That's certainly up there for me. Book 3, The Dragon Reborn, is one where I feel like things kind of get going and you feel, this is kind of where the series is going. Book 12, The Gathering Storm, is one where I feel like there's a great catharsis and you get the sense that Rand has finally put things together. So I really did enjoy Book 12, and maybe I'll go with a cop-out though again. Book 14, A Memory of Light, being my favorite because it wraps up everything so nicely. I'm going with that. I'm copping out again, sorry. But there it is. Let's move on. Uptown 3636. Outside of the fantasy genre, what are some of your other favorite genres and books? And there's a very closely related question from Nicole Chow, who asks, what other genres are your favorite aside from fantasy? Okay, so I actually really like to read. I do like sci-fi and that sort of thing every now and again. But I think outside of fantasy, I really love to read just broadly literature. I love poetry, and poetry from just about any time period. Obviously, I love medieval literature. I like reading history, and I like reading science. So yeah, I believe in reading broadly as possible. So I would say, and lately I've been reading a lot of stuff like about the brain and about the universe and stuff like that. So, and I do think that reading that stuff makes you not just more informed, but if you want to be a writer, reading that sort of thing makes you a better writer, in my opinion. So yeah, just read broadly. So yeah. So we've got Josh Reese. 5 books you would recommend to get into sci-fi. Okay, sci-fi. So going with the easy one here, Dune by Frank Herbert. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. She is one of my favorite fantasy writers. I haven't read all of her sci-fi stuff, but that one is I think, an important book to read for the genre. 1984 by George Orwell. I know that's kind of a dystopia book, but it's sort of sci-fi, so let's go with that. That is a book I would have every senior in high school read, 1984. Dan Simmons' Hyperion. Hyperion is a book that I read and really liked a lot. I thought that was really cool, kind of just a real trippy book. I enjoyed it. And the sequels to it as well. And then number 5, The Handmaid's Tale. Again, a bit of a dystopia kind of thing by Margaret Atwood, but I think it's close enough. It's sci-fi, right? I don't know. You can tell me if you think it's sci-fi or not. But that's my answer. Let's see. Who have we got here? Books and Stuff with Chaz. I would like to know what inspired you to join the BookTube community and share your love of books with the world. Oh, what a nice question. So I have been teaching this fantasy novels class for years, and while the students who enroll in that class are just wonderful, I don't get a lot of students in that class. So I really wanted to reach out and find just a broader community of fantasy lovers. And I thought, hey, I bet you there's nobody on YouTube who does fantasy. So I got a quick education when I went onto YouTube. Previously, I had been just looking at tennis highlights on YouTube. So I got a very quick education, and I will be the first to say that my very first videos are extremely awkward. I like what I was trying to say, but I had a lot to learn about how to make videos and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I wanted to be part of a community. That's the short answer, and it's been a really terrific in that regard, I have to say. Okay, Jay Jurholm. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He has 4 questions. What's up with all the Hindu Buddha statues in your videos? I think I sort of answered that already. I lived in South Asia. I also married a person who grew up in South Asia, and a lot of the art is stuff that we bring home from Nepal. Other things are gifts from friends from India and also from Nepal. So yeah, that's what all this art is about. And I just love all the colors and everything that it brings to our home. And I also feature it in my videos because I don't, like a lot of YouTubers seem to have like a room where they have bookshelves, and I don't have that. So I just thought, let's just change locations and show a bit of the art so that the viewers have something nice to look at. So yeah, do you listen to audiobooks? No, I've never listened to an audiobook, and I keep thinking, maybe I should give it a try. And I hear people recommending good audiobooks sometimes, so I'm tempted, I will say that. What do I do for a living? That's number 3. I am an English professor, and yeah, that's what I do for a living. And what made you interested in fantasy books? I think I've addressed that one already, so I'm going to move on. Thank you for those questions. From Navi Sahota. Congratulations. What's your favorite mythological creature? And this is actually the last question. My favorite mythological creature, dragons. I know it's done and been done and done and done, and it's being done still a lot, but I just love dragons, right? It's like Tolkien said in his essay that he desired dragons. And so yeah, dragons go way back. They're ancient mythological creatures that have a lot of symbolic resonance And I think done well, they can still be really interesting. So yeah, I love dragons. Yeah. So that's it. Those are all the questions. As I said, I don't feel like I have done justice to them, really. I could have gone on and on with some of these wonderful questions. I appreciate you asking them and listening to this video, which is probably going to be one of my longer ones. So yeah, it's really been so wonderful getting to know you guys, and I look forward to interacting some more with you in the near future. Until next time.